Hello, and welcome to Dune Day. Today is the 29th of February, Leap Day, and the first screenings in my area of Dune Part 2 start later today, 3 o'clock. So I have a ticket for the 3 o'clock showing. Very much looking forward to it, and just wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk a little bit about my experience with the whole Dune franchise. I became aware of Dune in the late 70s. I'm fucking old, kid. But I'd seen Star Wars in the theater, and that changed everything. And so I started reading things like Starlog magazine, ask your parents. But that focused on science fiction in general. There might have been some fantasy and horror stuff in there as well, but for the most part, it was about science fiction, television, and film. And in part of the fun of that magazine were the ads, because this is pre-internet, pre-VHS, so 35 millimeter prints were being sold. Replica props were being sold, masks, things like that. And there was also a Dune board game. And I think interest in Dune had sort of resurged around this time in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, because Spanish director, is it Antonio? Jodorowsky, in any case, was putting together his adaptation of Dune. And there's a great documentary, if you're a fan of the franchise or just like to see freaking weirdos at work. Jodorowsky's Dune, spelled with a J, is available. And it's a good watch because it's just absolutely crazy. As nuts as you might think David Lynch's Dune is, this was like beyond wacky. And it's a shame that it didn't gel together better. From the way the documentary goes, it was all set to go, but killed at the last minute because the studios were like, this guy's a madman, and we're not going to work with him. And so the project fell apart. But Salvador Dali was set to have a role. Mick Jagger was involved, Orson Welles, a lot of the creative team that put the production design of Alien together a few years later. So lots of folks were involved. It seems like kind of a missed opportunity, but it might have also been really terrible because I don't think the technology was where it needed to be to pull off what they wanted to do. Reach exceeding the grasp, so to speak. But so I was familiar with the name, and that it was some kind of science fiction epic series. And I found the original book in my library, and next to it on the shelf were all the other books in the series. And they had that great cover art. They had these really epic titles, God Emperor of Doom and Children of Dune and Dune Messiah and on and on. And there were ads for the books in the magazine. So it just sounded like this big, sprawling science fiction epic that I wanted to be involved with, because my mom was a big reader when I was a kid, and she was into these historical fiction series, and like every year or a couple of years there'd be a new volume out. These big, huge, thick books that just covered, these huge time spans. And I always thought that was cool. That was a cool way to experience a story. And then there was Dune. So I read the first book when I was a kid, and I loved it. And like, it was just such vibrant writing and such great world building and such a really interesting mythology, and just like the detail. Like I remember, maybe because I had to start the book a couple of times, but I just remember a lot of the information in that opening chapter, the description of the globe, this gilded globe where all the latitude and longitude markers were done in these thin bands of gold, and it was so well described in the opening of the book that for whatever reason always stuck with me. So when Lynch's Dune came out, I didn't get a chance to see it in the theater because I was too young to drive, and we didn't have a movie theater within walking distance. And trying to talk anybody else in my house in a position to do so to accompany me to this movie was a losing battle. So that didn't happen. And then the reviews came out, and got savaged, absolutely savaged by the critics. And there were these stories of theaters having to hand out like character sheets and things like that to help people follow along, the plot. And having read the book, I didn't think whatever plot they came up with was going to be so convoluted, so complicated, that people needed visual aids, and handouts, homework to follow along and enjoy it. So I didn't get a chance to see it. And then this is mid '80s, so VHS was sort of hitting its peak. And we had a video store in town, and I was aware of like the release date. So like a pain in the ass, I was hanging around the video store. Back in these days, I think things still came out on Tuesdays. So I was probably just hanging around, being a pest, waiting for it to come in the mail, waiting for it to be entered into inventory and put up on the shelf because I needed to see this movie. And I saw it, and I liked it. I think with I was all of maybe 14 or 15 when I saw it, but I enjoyed it. And there's still a lot, even with modern eyes and an adult sensibility, there's still a lot to like about Lynch's Dune. Now, the special effects don't hold up. I think that's more a product of the time and budget constraints than anything else. I think the movie, if you aren't familiar with the book, I can see where it might be confusing. The weird opening narration by Virginia Madsen doesn't help. It's very strange. And just, in very straightforward, boring, never do this as a screenwriter terms, it just lays out a bunch of exposition that I can only imagine would have been part of the longer rumored Lynch cut of the movie that he insists doesn't exist because anything extra he shot was destroyed when it wasn't included in the movie. Yeah, I had a good time with it. The production design of that movie, the practical sets are amazing. The costumes, just like there is so much weird shit in this movie going on. The Harkonnens or Harkonnens, as I guess they're called now. They had their eyes sewn shut. They made use of the whole heart plug thing. There was like this really uncomfortable, violent homoerotic current running through all of the Harkonnen stuff. Some of that stuff. I'm thinking of the levitation suit in particular made it into Denis Villeneuve's version. But yeah, it's a bizarre movie, but one, and just a side note, one of my favorite parts of it, and it's a shame it's not as upfront as it used to be, in an older version of the movie, a home video version of the movie. I don't remember if it was the widescreen VHS or the first edition DVD, but that opening scene where the navigator's being rolled in and his entourage is in, on either side, one of these cats does a freaking full-on face plant on the ground, gets themselves up, gets back in line, and keeps on marching like nothing happened. And it's just a wonderful, weird little moment that I think in the latest streaming version you can kind of see. But it feels like it was sort of cut around, pan and scanned around a little bit to make it not quite so obvious, but it's a fun little moment. So, and there it's at, I'm not super familiar with the TV miniseries. I was Um, I think I was deployed, or at least on active duty at that time. So my television entertainment was limited at best during those days. But I heard good things, but never got around to seeing that, so I'm not super familiar with it. Um, but I am very excited about part two. I really enjoyed part one. I know some people thought it was boring and all of that, but I think I've watched it a few times now, and it's just such a well constructed, even leaving aside like the direction and cinematography, both of which are stellar. Um, I think it's just a really well constructed script. I think it's a really well constructed story. Especially when it comes to sort of the, I don't want to say inaccuracies, I guess, or the different perspectives of Paul's visions, which, play a really big part. The whole bit, spoilers for part one, by the way, but the whole bit with Jamis, which is super important. Like, that is a huge event in the development of Paul as a character and the progression of the story, and it is completely absent from Lynch's version. And I believe that's one of the things that actually got filmed and then cut by the studio to bring down the runtime. But to the complete and utter detriment of the story. Jamis is such an important character. And I saw some chatter online. People were confused. It's just like, well, wait, this guy was part of the visions. And he says he's going to teach him the ways of the desert. But two things. One, Paul says early on in the movie that the things he dreams about don't happen exactly the way he dreams them. So there's already a little bit of unreliability in those visions established. And two, Jamis did introduce him to the ways of the desert. It was Jamis's insistence on the trial by combat, the duel, that brought Paul into Fremen society. That it's a society based on a code, based on rules and ritual, and there's a certain kind of logic to everything that's going to follow from that death. So yeah, I think moments like that, as far as the visions go, like Duncan Idaho's demise, if you know, you know. There are bits in the premonition of that and the actual event that link back, and it's the little tiny things, like insect-sized things, in fact, that sort of tie those two things together. And from there, you can sort of say, well, this seems more accurate than... There's just a lot going on, and it's done with a really deft touch, and it just makes it a lot more interesting. I also like the playing with the notion of Paul as Messiah, Savior, the One. Those ideas maybe being somewhat manufactured, maybe creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the responsibilities and consequences of that. So, and it's just a beautiful movie to look at. I'm trying not to fanboy too much. I am not immune to information from the outside world. So I've heard the reviews, glowing and gushing as they are. I am keeping an open mind. I would imagine I'm going to be well entertained, and I presume that I'm going to like it very much. I'm holding back, obviously, because I haven't seen it, but I'm very curious to see if a lot of the reaction is just, hyperbole, or whether it has sort of earned a lot of this praise. So very much looking forward to it, and I will post a update later on today to sort of sum up some initial thoughts when I do get a chance to see it. So I hope everyone is well, and we will talk to you later.